The key to empathy is really being able to put yourself in someone else's exact experience and mindset, which is not always possible because I've worked with folks, in the philanthropy work who have every amazing resource financially, and then folks who have been, fleeing danger when I worked with refugees and everything in between. So asking someone in, a penthouse over Central Park to understand what someone's going through in a refugee camp that's a big leap.
Welcome back, y'all. This is the circuit where we have conversations with members of local nonprofits to discuss what is working, bringing a little bit of hope and inspiration into your content feed. Today, I am with Kristin Leutz, who is the executive director of Harbor Homes. Welcome, Kristin.
Thank you. Welcome.
So excited to have you here.
I'm so proud to be here, so thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to get into Harbor Homes, but first I'd love to start with you and just learn a little bit about your background. You said you've been in the nonprofit space for
150 years. No, really, it has been my life's work to work in philanthropy, which is, I think, the luckiest thing. It's given purpose to my life, and it's given me a lot of wonderful people and community around me, and so I've been really lucky. Most of that time, I've been doing a lot of fundraising. That's how I started. I moved to the western part of Massachusetts, so another rural location in our beautiful Commonwealth, and began there, first in higher education, and then really quickly figuring out grassroots giving and philanthropy was what my heart desired. And so I've been doing that for a long time now.
And was there a moment that you can point to where you were like, I want to be on the grassroots side, raising funds and enabling impact?
That's an interesting question. I think it just evolved. I had a very brief foray into corporate in the middle of that time. I went and got a master's in industrial organizational psychology. Big mouthful, but basically it's just thinking about systems and people and behavior. And, I went and worked in a pretty large financial services firm trying to help them create more balance for work and life. And I think I just kept seeing people who were really deeply unsatisfied in their corporate lives, and how much the thing that would light them up was somehow volunteering or, getting involved with the campaigns around the business. And so I just knew, I thought, this is the place where I'm going to land after this. And so I kind of went right off into a path of entrepreneurship, and then led me to our community foundation. Community foundations are wonderful Swiss Army knives of good, just an incredibly useful tool. And I spent about a decade there doing that work. And that was it for me, because we saw hundreds of nonprofits, grassroots, and really helping them grow and build capacity and, create community around that was the best joy I could have had.
After being at the community foundation and seeing a wide range of different people doing work in different cause areas, was there one that hooked you, and why?
Yeah, I really felt like just safety. So having had a background in psychology, looking at that, basic hierarchy of needs, if you don't have safety, you don't have much else. And so for me personally, I was drawn to those causes. And so we had it was in early days of kind of professionalizing the field of philanthropic advising. It used to be that you would get to know a local nonprofit through volunteering. Maybe you'd meet the staff, and that's how you'd become involved as a donor or a giver. And, right around the time when I started this work, there was a movement to professionalize some of that and train folks. And so we went through a process becoming what's called a chartered advisor in philanthropy. It encourages you to really, as someone who asks for funding, think about your own values first. And so we created a bunch of programs around that were really beautiful, to engage intergenerational work, thinking about what matters to you, what do you want to preserve or change in the world. And so in that conversation, I thought about that for myself. And so I thought safety for me was the big thing.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? If you don't have the foundation laid, then nothing else is going to happen.
That's right.
This is probably a conversation for a different time, but that's so cool that you were on the transition where the idea of philanthropic advising really became like an actual thing.
Yeah.
And some of the other work that I've been playing with, I think there's a really great opportunity to engage young people, the next generation who have access to wealth and are maybe thinking about how to do that in different ways, I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring them into that conversation too. So,
Resource Generation, I'll put in a plug for them. They
yep.
do amazing work. And I worked with a set of tools I still do to this day called 2164. And they just have a beautiful way of engaging research that came out of the Center for Creative Leadership and now applying it to this use case. So it's really fun to do. We can do it anytime.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Very cool. So can you outline a little bit what the problem and the issue is that y'all are tackling at Harbor Homes?
Yeah, so we hear a lot about a housing crisis, and that I think that's true. Although, crisis implies a sort of dramatic start point, and a crescendo. And I think this has obviously been something that's been coming and building for a very long time. And it's part of a larger systemic web of, downstream effects. And so I think in some ways, more than a crisis, I think of it as a wave that we are really trying to surf on and ride as a whole country, and particularly in the Commonwealth of Mass, as we know. So the state shelter system is overburdened. Thanksgiving time, we were all of the different shelter providers emailing and saying, does anyone have vacancy anywhere? And the answer was no. Every email came in from every location across the state. No vacancy. And so when you see that happening over and over again, it's not what people traditionally think. There's not been a wave or an arrival of certain types of folks. It's meaning that everyone, those who are least able to manage the complexity of securing increasing rents and, finding places to stay, they end up kind of at the bottom of that shuffle. And so, we know that whether it's purchasing a home, even, if for an upper to middle income family is difficult, finding inventory is difficult, building new things and developing projects are challenging and difficult. And we talk a lot about the middle income folks and how do they find housing. And so it's true at all levels. And so when you're working with a population who is currently not housed, you see how the bottom, the foundation of that is all of the conditions that might make someone experience homelessness are just made worse.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's been this thing that's been building beneath the surface for a long time, and it feels like a crisis right now because it's kind of coming to a head, but it sounds like these have been issues that have been set for a very long time.
Yes. Yeah. And, I think as we look to the future, the next generation of people who may be doing this work, if we're not able to systemically change it now, the climate impacts, all of these things will have an even further demand on our ability to provide housing, and thinking about, the sustainability of the density of housing that we might need, and, the preservation of our beautiful lands and environments. So it's a lot of issues all kind of wrapped up into one.
Absolutely.
And it lands on the doorstep of someone who maybe recently is evicted, and, then we see them.
It's all these issues wrapped up into one, and then it comes back to this base issue of being warm and having a place to stay, and that being the groundwork for everything else. So I think it's important to understand these problems and look into these problems, but I also want to focus our time on what is working and what is going well. And it sounds like Harbor Homes is doing some really amazing work, not only in providing shelter, but also additional services that can compound those effects.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fantastic human, Roseanne Haggerty, who came. I have been mostly living in Western Mass for a long time as I'm trying to make this transition to the Vineyard, and she's an Amherst College alumna, so I'll give them a shout out. And she's done really groundbreaking work around ending homelessness. There's a movement across the country of communities that want to say zero homelessness. And so, I hope that being a relatively new leader here on the island, that I can inspire others to take up that cause. Because as you can see from the examples that her organization has created, Community Solutions, there are good things happening in this work. It's not hopeless. There's a lot we can do about people experiencing homelessness. And so that's really, I think, what I'd like to focus on. I think at a very basic, immediate level, what's working well for Harbor Homes has been to provide seasonal shelter, because this community, unlike others, has a unique pattern of housing in that we are experiencing a very large summer population. There are also a huge increase in workforce over the summer that sometimes comes with housing, which is terrific. And then those people do unfortunately lose their housing when the job ends. And so we have been able to provide from now April or November through April housing for people that lose that summer housing. And so many of our guests in our overnight shelter actually have summer housing. Many of them still have jobs on the island right now. They're working full time, but they cannot find an affordable place to stay. Because, as you think about all the inputs to this, there's the workforce issue of the summer, tourism economy increasing the need for workforce. There's also short-term, rentals and how they affect how people have used the existing properties that we have on the island, and places where maybe someone was renting, can no longer happen because they're getting a much higher rate to put that through some kind of a rental property system. So, folks we've seen, people economically also who are here year round and maybe have the space have decided to rent out places where maybe they were having a boarding situation, someone renting a room in their home. That might have been very affordable a couple of years ago, but now they're charging more and more. We have one guest who recently heard this story where they had been renting someone's basement space, no bathroom or, it wasn't an apartment, just a basement space. And that they were paying, maybe $300 to $400 a month for that. Then the next year, the person raised the rent over $500, and then they really wanted $1,000 a month for that space. And at that point, our guest said no, and it came through to the shelter. So, we're not necessarily seeing people that you might think of as a typical, stigmatized person living in homelessness. These are people who maybe had a place and they've lost it through these kinds of pressures and conditions. And so that's just one story, but there are others like it. And definitely, when I came to this job, I was surprised at how many folks had full-time work and still couldn't make it. So I think that having that seasonal shelter meets a huge need, and it's super important for us. I think the other thing that's working well is the idea of what we call congregant homes. This model has come out of the elder housing kind of community, but we're adapting it for this case of looking at people who can be in a program with us to learn life skills and over a longer period of time, certainly not permanent, but working with them to get where they can afford a little bit more rent and get into stable housing. So we have case management services. We provide this life skills programming for them so they can afford to, pay a participant fee to be in that program. That's very affordable for them, but they're working their way towards something that might work better for them. And so those two homes, we own one for women, one for men. And they're small, it's a group living situation, so it comes with all the human things that go with that, but we are able to have case managers who really work with folks there. So those are different models and unique. I'd say they're not happening everywhere, but they're happening here on the Vineyard, and it's exciting to be part of it.
And how do you think empathy plays a role in this whole housing issue and bringing not only funders, but community supporters into it?
I think the key to empathy is really being able to put yourself in someone else's exact experience and mindset, which is not always possible, because I've worked with folks, in the philanthropy work who have every amazing resource financially, and then folks who have been, fleeing danger when I worked with refugees and everything in between. So asking someone in, a penthouse over Central Park to understand what someone's going through in a refugee camp that's a big leap. But I think when you work on this issue of housing, and we happen to live on an island where I've noticed the community, there's such a sense of interdependence, and everyone does really try to look out for each other, that leap is going to be able to be easier. So I think we have a huge opportunity to build community empathy here on Martha's Vineyard. And I think that's exciting. We're working as a staff on a project we call 365, A Mile in My Shoes. The idea is that a year-long experience of learning and reflecting on the idea of community empathy. And can we build community empathy as a community resource? And so that just engages folks each month with a walk somewhere beautiful on the island and talking with someone who's experienced homelessness in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's someone who worked with someone. Maybe it's someone who has found themselves without a home or a safe place to stay, even temporarily, but they have some experience. Or maybe it's someone that's currently participating in one of our programs. So we're going to invite a guest walk host every month to meet up with folks and take a little walk and talk. We're going to have a Zoom, so in case you can't be here on the island, but you want to be engaged, because we know so many people love the Vineyard that aren't always here physically. And this experience hopefully will have a collective giving portion as well, where people will choose to think about ways they can make a difference to the problem, and perhaps raise financial resources to do it, or in-kind resources. We get meals donated, we get lots of other things donated, clothes, coats. So the idea is that everyone can do something, and so we want to engage people kind of methodically and slowly over that thought of how could I walk a mile in someone's shoes that's been through this, and then let them decide how they want to kind of plug in and help.
That's awesome, making it accessible for people to find ways that they can engage. Because I know personally, at least, and I'm assuming for a lot of other people, an issue like this can feel really big and really scary. And I almost feel like resistance, like, I don't even know how to get involved with it, so I'm not even going to take that step. But how can people get engaged? And what are you like looking for? Like, what are the ways that would actually support what you're doing?
So we have from time to time, a wish list, an Amazon wish list. So on Giving Tuesday, we posted that on a Facebook group, Islanders Talk, and people filled the wish list. So that was like one quick and easy thing that surprised me with how quickly and generously people responded. So in part, that week got us thinking about this 365 adventure and how we could, really be thoughtful about what we do ask of folks to think and do and participate in. I think each person's different. So for example, advocacy. We know that the housing crisis will be an ongoing thing, and, making sure that our legislators are informed and aware of the issues is one way to just become involved. So becoming an advocate, knowing, what are the facts? How many people experience homelessness? We know, for example, we see about 20 to 25 guests at our winter overnight shelter. The shelter's already full. That's happening sooner this year than it happened in past years. So the idea of this need increasing is something people can just be aware of. And one way to help is to just know that and share. We have about 15 families. There are no resources right now on this island for families experiencing emergency homelessness to go to. We try to help and provide hotels with what we call a hotel respite program, where we could place a family, but our overnight shelter is not a place for kids. So, we do have to be thinking as a community about, can hotels participate in that? Right now, we haven't yet gotten a hotel that's going to agree to provide those rooms for us. So, it's looking at properties. I went with a realtor today to look at different properties for sale to find a permanent home for our overnight shelter, because we've been renting in a space that's going to be torn down and something new built there. So I think just showing up at community meetings when there are zoning issues on, and making sure that you're there to present a positive voice that can counter some of the fear that can come out when people think about having a neighbor who's homeless, and what does that mean. And it's not to say that there aren't folks that we encounter who've dealt with bad life choices. Maybe they're experiencing addiction problems. Maybe they have mental health challenges. Those people deserve shelter too. And we don't have a lot of resources or places to put them. They end up, straining the hospital system. They end up going to other places. And so I think the idea of coming together also as a web of community supporters. So maybe you work in healthcare and you want to partner with us to figure out ways to really communicate around people who we may see chronically in that system. Maybe you're involved in some kind of domestic violence work, and you want to help us find a property there we could purchase to provide a safe home for someone experiencing that kind of crisis. So these are things that over time, Harbor Homes can serve as what I refer to as a bedrock organization. Some people in nonprofit world would call it a backbone organization. Systems change, whatever jargon you use, the bottom line is that it's something that you can count on. It's a nonprofit that can continue to try to build partnerships with other folks doing important work, make sure we all know each other, so people could get involved that way if they're already working in the nonprofit sector or they're on another board. Other ways people can get involved, there's so many. I think, getting involved in marketing and communications, we haven't had a lot of experience in that or even time to be thinking about posting online and doing those things. So I love meeting with a media company, for example, who's helping us get the message out. So, it's kind of like, what's your talent? Come meet with us. And, we'd figure out a way to have it make sense for you. Maybe you're a great public speaker and you want to go to the State House with us. Maybe you're a whiz on the social media and, you can zazz up our Instagram. I'm sure there are ways to get you involved and to help. Maybe you like to cook and you want to be the next brownie lady. There's so many ways.
That's amazing. I love this perspective that you're bringing to it, that it really is a community effort, and building those connections and seeing where people can fit in can bring a lot of life and energy, not only to the cause itself, but to the individuals who are participating. And you said something that I thought was really fascinating that I want to highlight, of the idea of empathy being a community resource. And the idea of a resource implies that it's giving something to you, right? Like I'm receiving something from a resource. How do you see empathy as being something that is giving to an individual?
So I know what empathy feels like when it comes at me, and you probably do too. And so sometimes I imagine people to just pause for a minute and think about a time when you really felt cared for, and by someone who wasn't your direct, domestic partner or parent or, your immediate family. Like, how did you feel? How did that come to you? Was it a teacher? Was it someone else in your life, a healthcare worker? Anyone who's been hospitalized knows what that feels like. The nurses are magic. Thanks, nurses. I think that first step is connecting with that. And then all of a sudden, you know what that resource feels like because you know what it felt like for you and the difference it made. I mean, I've been myself this year, the recipient of empathy. My family had a house fire a year ago. Last week was the anniversary. And we all got out safe, knock on wood. But it was a very traumatic experience. And, when you leave your home at 2 a.m, and we haven't been back since really to live there, that changes things. And, my son, who is 17 now, said very eloquently a few months later, he wrote a piece about how the community stepped in and cared for us. And so all of a sudden we were surrounded by food and clothes and warm places to stay and someone else's pet to go and love on and a place for our dogs to hang out. And, even someone who was allergic to cats let us bring the cat and she could live in their basement for a few weeks. And so that experience of losing our stuff in our house for a while was a big game changer. And I knew immediately that this is a resource. I may not, our family were educators and nonprofit workers. We don't have tons of financial resources, but we had amazing riches in empathy. And so, my empathy bag was heavy. And so I figure, this is a resource we sometimes forget is out there, but everybody's got it to give. And, it's an act of respect and care to actually ask people to give it because it makes you feel good when you do it.
Being someone who's been experienced in the fundraising world, how are you going into these funding conversations? Like, what's your approach to get people on board to support this?
Well, I can't ignore the importance of state and local funding. So we have an entire staff position dedicated to homelessness prevention. So this is someone who talks to people before they've been out on the street. And her entire position is funded by the county, by Dukes County. And so that position is really designed to keep those numbers as close to zero as possible. It's really important that Harbor Homes can serve that role. That's part of being the bedrock organization. And so her job is to work with all different kinds of organizations across the island that may be encountering people who are in some kind of trouble of homelessness. So I would say that's first and foremost really important thing to know and to remember. So we get a grant for that. We also have a grant from the state to support most of the needs of our overnight shelter. That includes the staffing, professional staffing that we need. That we just bought cots this year instead of air mattresses, and that's the kind of thing that was funded entirely through that state fund. So really important source of funding for us are those kinds of grants. We frequently apply for. The towns have Community Preservation Act or money, and so we apply to those grants because a third of it is typically designated for housing. And the way that we can use funds like that is to start building up the money for a down payment on a property so that we could be ready to buy and compete in a very competitive real estate market to do that. So, we're raising money at different levels. The grant money to supply the, immediate overnight shelter needs. On Giving Tuesday, we raised $5,000 in the 24 hours, and that was used immediately to expand our shelter space to, there was a slight unused space next door where we could actually put the women into a separate room from the men, which was a huge benefit for us. And make sure that we could keep 20 beds. So, little monies come in and we use it for things like that. Big monies come in and we make sure that the program is set for the year, that we can pay the rent for the shelter space that we use. But for individuals, we will probably, if we find that right property, be looking to, just as we did with the other 2 homes that we purchased, reduce or have as low mortgage as possible on it, as an example. So we had generous people who gave significant gifts to help us, pay down the mortgage on the men's congregate home that we have. There will be repairs that come up from time to time. Our community foundation here, a lovely reception a couple weeks back where we were with other grantees and got a grant to do physical improvements in the men's house. Because just like any other homeowner, the air conditioners break. We have plumbing problems. We need the heat fixed. So these are things that we can do through grants as well.
Absolutely. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. This whole issue is complex and can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, but you made it incredibly approachable and really just showed lots of ways that people can get involved and provided an underlying nature of hope, and that there is things that we can do and that we are doing that are going to bring this on the right track. So thank you for sitting down with us, and I hope that this content can be used to just further spread your mission and continue to do the amazing work that you are doing. So thanks for
Well,
stopping by.
I just want to put in a plug to support what you're doing here at this amazing public media project. It's incredibly valuable, and it's the way we all want to get our information now is through video. So thank you for allowing us to be on camera with you too.
Yeah, absolutely.